On September 8, 1951, representatives of 48 of the Allied nations of World War II and the nation of Japan met in San Francisco to sign the treaty that would officially put an end to hostilities brought on from the Second World War. The goal of the treaty was to establish peaceful relations between Japan and the Allied powers and to effectively end the American occupation of Japan, and technically, the treaty did just that. However, the United States forced Japan to sign another treaty just between the two of them. Named the Security Treaty between the United States and Japan, the American government dictated to Japan that not only US military presence be maintained on the island, but they could be used for any purpose without consulting Japanese government, could be authorized to put down domestic protest, and removed any obligation to defend Japan if the nation were attacked by a third party. For most of the 50s, diplomacy between the United States and Japan was marked by the latter pushing for a revision to the Security Treaty. After the Sunagawa Struggle of 1955, where a base expansion into a nearby village resulted in a long bloody protest, and the Girard Incident of 1957, in which an American serviceman murdered a Japanese housewife, the United States agreed to a revisal. Negotiations on the revised treaty began in 1958. It was to be called the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan, or Anpo Joyaku, or AMPO for short. The right-wing government of Japan, led by Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi, saw the new treaty as an improvement, committing the US to defending Japan from an attack by a third party, requiring prior consultation with the Japanese government before dispatching US forces based in Japan overseas, removing the clause pre-authorizing suppression of domestic disturbances, and specifying an initial 10-year term, after which the treaty could be repealed by either party with 1 year's notice. Because it got popular support from both the American government and his own party, Kishi figured that the treaty would be ratified quickly. But the treaty was not popular with the majority of the Japanese public, who wanted no security treaty at all. To them, having the United States maintain a military presence was just a recipe for the country being dragged into another devastating war. Left-wing Japanese in particular knew that the United States was just going to use Japan as a pawn in their ever-growing Cold War, which they wanted no part of. Things got worse when Kishi, predicting the breakout of protests, tried to pass the Police Duties Bill, which would have given Japanese police new powers of warrantless search and seizure and to specifically target would-be protesters. This was met with public outcry as an attempt to make Japan return to the fascist authoritarianism of the World War II era, which Kishi had been a part of. Kishi was forced to withdraw the bill, which emboldened protesters to begin coordinating protests around the country. Between 1959 and 1960, left-wing protests around Japan grew and grew. Student activists and labor unions organized sit-ins and battled with police on the streets. Meanwhile, left-wing parties such as the Japanese Socialist Party dragged out the base to keep negotiations of the treaty from moving forward. Things hit a fever pitch on May 19th when Kishi, in a hurry to ratify the treaty before a visit by President Eisenhower, ratified the treaty with only his party present, no debate, and only a voice vote. This threw gasoline on the fire of the newly coined AMPO protest, and Kishi was roundly condemned for his anti-democratic actions, with even his own party calling for his resignation. Thus, the AMPO protest shifted from stopping the security treaty to ousting Kishi from power. It all culminated in the June 15th incident, where far-right ultranationalist counter-protesters, who were sympathetic to Kishi and the United States' anti-communist stance, rammed a group of peaceful protesters with trucks and attacked them with wooden staves. In response, student activists attempted to storm the Diet building, which resulted in police brutally beating them. In the ensuing struggle, a female student, Michiko Kanba, was killed. The violence of the June 15th incident would cause newspapers to turn against these protests and demand both sides to stand down. Kishi, despite having the resources to quell the protests through his connections to ultra-nationalist groups and organized crime, decided that it would be best to call off Eisenhower's visit and resign from his position as prime minister to save face. Though the AMPO protests were successful in ousting Kishi from power, it did not stop the treaty. Despite the largest protests of the movement taking place on the day the treaty went into effect, the AMPO protests died down soon afterwards. The failure of the AMPO protests had a huge effect on Japanese politics. Right-wingers were emboldened by their role in dissipating the protests and began openly committing acts of violence, such as the assassination of Socialist Party chairman Inejiro Asanuma that fall. Leftist protesters were disillusioned by the failure of their parties not doing enough to stop Ishii and his government, and began to focus their efforts to more direct action protests that lasted for most of the 60s and 70s. But many of the Japanese New Left began to channel their frustrations into art, exploring what happens when politicians and police are more interested in maintaining their own power over helping the people. One of those pieces looked over the history that led to the AMPO protest and asked, what would have happened if the United States hadn't influenced Japan into signing the Security Treaty? How would things be different? Would things be different at all? In an alternate history post-war Japan, the country has implemented hyper-capitalist policies to expand economic growth and rejoin the international stage following their occupation after their loss in World War II. While the policies were successful for establishing political and economic growth, they left many Japanese citizens behind with the erosion of workers' rights and the death of small towns. In reaction, left-wing anti-government protests have become the norm, with one anarchist group, the Sect, becoming well known for their planned terrorist attacks and political assassinations. To combat this civil unrest, a counterterrorism unit known as the Kerberos Panzer Corps, or the Special Unit, has been set up, carrying out warrantless search and seizure and extrajudicial killings, all in the name of maintaining law and order. One of these soldiers, Kazuki Fusei, lets humanity get the best of him as he hesitates to shoot a teenage freedom fighter as she winds up detonating a bomb and killing herself. Because his actions put himself and his fellow officers in danger and damage the special unit's reputation, Fusei is reprimanded and forced to go back to training. While visiting the grave of the young girl, he meets a female member of the sect named Kei Amamiya, who claims to be the girl's elder sister. The two of them end up growing close to one another, with the emotive Kei bringing out the inner warmth of the stoic Fusei. But in the background, a secret plot is unfolding. The special unit's rival division, Public Security, is planning a way to discredit the unit and have it be consolidated into their division. What exactly do they have planned? Why do they have such an interest in Fusei and Kei? And what exactly is the mysterious Wolf Brigade? A counter-espionage unit so clandestine that not even other Kerberos members believe it exists. 1999's Jin-Roh the Wolf Brigade is one of those classic anime that, even if you haven't seen it, you probably have absorbed it through osmosis, either through AMVs, wallpapers, or pop culture parodies.
The uprising should be happening any minute now. Bring it.
But at the same time, it's also one of those anime titles that is a lot deeper when you scratch the surface. What would appear to be a gritty action anime about super soldiers in an alternate history dieselpunk Japan is actually a thoughtful and downright depressing meditation on fascism, oppressive systems of justice, and how authoritarian governments and systems completely dehumanize people from the masses to their own foot soldiers. In other words, Jin-Roh the Wolf Brigade is an anti-fascist anime told from the point of view of fascist authority. Now, if you are even passingly familiar with some of the minds behind Jin-Roh, it being an anti-fascist work shouldn't surprise you, because a lot of its world and themes can be attributed to its writer, Mamoru Oshii. Oshii witnessed the Anpo protests as a child and took part in left-wing movements in the late 60s and early 70s, and his time with leftist anarchist groups would help shape a lot of his creative vision. But the history leading up to Jin-Roh's creation is surprisingly complex. In the mid-80s, after the commercial failure of Angel's Egg and a short stint at Studio Ghibli that ended very bitterly, Oshii was taking a brief hiatus from the anime industry, and during that short break, he decided he wanted to write and direct a live-action film. That film would end up being 1987's The Red Spectacles, which would be the starting point for the decade-spanning Kerberos saga. But despite the existence of radio plays and manga series, Oshii always intended for the saga to be a film trilogy. After the release of a sequel, 1991's Stray Dog Kerberos Panzer Corps, he was already planning out a final film, and because he was in the midst of a huge comeback in the anime world thanks to the success of the Patlabor series, he decided that the next film would be animated. Taking in a sushi dinner with the president of Bandai Visual, Oshii was about to pitch them a 6-episode OVA based on the Kerberos saga manga that he had written. But just when he was about to pull out his pitch, the Bandai president pulled out a pitch of their own and asked Oshii if he was interested in doing a film adaptation of the popular sci-fi manga called Ghost in the Shell. Oshii agreed, and it led to Bandai eventually giving the green light to Jin-Roh to be put in pre-production. Years later, after the success of Gits, Manga Entertainment contacted Bandai to see if they had any other feature films so as to see if they could make lightning strike twice. That's when they found out about Jin-Roh and pushed both Bandai and Oshii to turn it from an OVA into a feature. But there was another catch. Bandai didn't believe that Oshii could do Jin-Roh by himself, and pushed him to hire another director. And when Production IG founder Mitsuhisa Ishikawa sided with Bandai, Oshii knew he had no choice. Taking suggestions from both parties, Oshii selected one of his most trusted proteges to direct Jin-Roh, Hiroyuki Okiura. Okiura already had a reputation in the industry for doing incredibly detailed animation work and was the chief animator and character designer for Gits. If there was a person to replace Oshii, it was going to be him. But Oshii wasn't going to let someone take the reins of a franchise he had masterminded so freely. In his own words, he begged Bandai to let him do the screenplay by himself. And with Oshii's longtime writer partner Kazunori Ito stepping aside, Bandai didn't have much choice. Bandai gave Oshii the go-ahead to write the screenplay, which he personally found difficult considering he wouldn't be involved with the animation process. Still, he managed to complete it in under a month and gave it to Okiura to create his own unique vision for. How exactly did that turn out? One of the decisions Okiura made going forward with Jin-Roh was that it was going to be entirely hand-drawn with no assistance with computers. Unlike Oshii, who favored the merging of hand-drawn with computer animation, perhaps a little too much, Okiura was a traditionalist to the point that Oshii would describe him as allergic to computers. He insisted that everything in Jin-Roh would be animated using cells, all adding to a total of 80,000 cells in the final product. A piece of trivia I find completely insane because it almost feels like there was no way some of these cuts were done entirely on human effort alone. The reason Okiura's animations are always so cinematic without sacrificing their rich detail is because he adores realism in anime, and the animation of Jin-Roh is an exhibit of his philosophy of hyper-realism. Everything from the cars, to the guns, to the people of Jin-Roh move and operate like they would if this was a live-action film. And while some shots do simplify certain things like the people in crowd shots, the details show up when they matter. They can make a complex piece of weaponry look all the more powerful. They can make an entire city feel completely lived in with each element having its own individuality. And especially, the details are displayed in having the character acting feel incredibly human to an almost heartbreaking degree.
If only we could have both died together. Then we would have been with each other.
But if so much time and resources were put into giving the film such a realist style, why even have Jin-Roh be animated in the first place? Well, if it was live action, it wouldn't have the art direction of Hiromasa Ogura. Ogura is responsible for giving the city of Hong Kong and Ghost in the Shell its gritty cyberpunk setting, and that skill translates well to Jin-Roh, where every location feels bleak. The color palette is muted, and the environments are in this perpetual overcast to give the film an appropriately austere tone. It's a movie where even an amusement park in a pastoral countryside can look lifeless and unwelcoming. That is to say nothing of Okiura's direction. Okiura takes a lot of cues from his master in his style of directing. Like Oshii, he wants to fully immerse the audience into the film's world. He does this by employing a technique of leaving the camera running, not just panning over the environments, but giving brief glimpses of society as it goes along its merry way while the main plot rolls on. The plot itself is constructed like an intricate scale model where every part is diligently placed. There is no stone unturned when laying out the plot and character motivations, and every scene is given a lot of careful setup to explain all the relevant details, like what's it like to be in protect gear, or what exactly is the relationship between the special unit and public security. And all scenes, whether they be action scenes or scenes of characters having a conversation, are set up very carefully. The beginnings of each scene are usually very slow, but still have an air of tension about them. So whenever an action scene starts, or someone reveals a twist in the plot, all the tension that has been building up since the scene began is released in a way that hits the audience hard. Or at least, some of the audience. A common criticism many people have with Jin-Roh is that its devotion to slowly playing out every scene makes the film boring. It's an understandable criticism. Going into this movie, the marketing and opening scene in the sewers makes this film out to be more action-packed than it actually is. A lot of this film is conversations between 2 or 3 characters, either smoke-filled room conversations discussing the main conspiracy, or the conversations between Kei and Fusei as Kei brings Fusei out of his shell and they begin to better understand each other as a star-crossed romance begins to form.
I bet that feels good. This river is connected to the sea, right? And the sea stretches far, far away to other seas.
People don't seem to want that. They want a little less talk and a little more action. But I feel like Okiura's slow, deliberate pacing and how he tells the story is important. By immersing us into the world and its story, you get a better feel of what the story is trying to tell us. Not just plot-wise, but theme-wise as well. It's no secret that Oshii adores heavily thematic works and really wants people to ponder something as they watch his films. The drawback of this is that it does lead to moments where the plot stops entirely just so the characters can engage in some philosophical conversations that don't even really lead to any answers. Jin-Roh is not immune to this problem.
Hey, you see that corner? I'm trying to think of what was there before. Do you remember? I guess that's how it goes.
But I think thanks to Okiura's unhurried direction, the main themes that Oshii is trying to impart comes in loud and clear. How exactly a fascist police state operates. The special unit is shown to be this well-oiled machine, a special force set up to commit extrajudicial killings and violate human rights, all in the name of maintaining law and order. And they are able to get away with this because they still operate within the law and can maneuver the legal framework, throwing away the spirit of the law while upholding the letter.
If we fire, they'll scatter with the first assault. It would be to our advantage if we could grab a few of these guys in the dragnet.
Shall we step in?
Even with our co-policing arrangement with the local cops, we are not the authority here. Let's wait and see for now.
You would expect this story to be about fascism versus anarchism, but that's not really the case. The sect and other anarchists barely play a role in this story. Rather, the story of Jin-Roh is one system of oppression versus another. The main conflict is between two parts of the same organization, the Special Kerberos Unit, who are the core infantry, and Public Security, who are the counterintelligence units. The ultimate goal of fascism is for the party in power to maintain hegemony over those they see as beneath them. Public Security wants to consolidate power and bring the Special Unit into their fold because they see their public presence as a liability to their power. They prefer to operate in the shadows.
So, with your division, and utilizing Chief Anya's political connections,
We can integrate our organization with that of the Capitol Police and thus reform our internal structures. But on one condition.
no more special unit.
And it's clear that they only see other humans as nothing more than pawns in a grander scheme. Fusei's acquaintance in public security, Hinmi, is revealed early on to just be using him to further his own unit's goals, and the lone character we have representing the anarchist, Kei, is revealed to be public security's ultimate trump card, having been offered clemency for her role as a bomb courier to seduce Fusei and create a public scandal that would discredit his units.
A forbidden romance between a terrorist and a member of the special unit. My division chief, he isn't very subtle, is he? Should be a good scandal, though. It'll do the job.
And it's not like the Kerberos unit is any better in this regard. The superiors appear to regard other units within the power structure with barely concealed contempt, seeing things like working in tandem with local police as beneath them.
This ludicrous co-policing arrangement isn't working at all. Let's just end it. Besides, we're like oil and water. Put the two together and we wind up floating on top like filthy grease.
And by the end of the anime, nothing has really changed. Fusei ends up being revealed to have been in on the plan all along, as he is a member of Kerberos' own counterintelligence group, the Wolf Brigade. He ends up foiling the plans of public security, and the oppressive system continues unabated, the public none the wiser to the internal power struggle. And since Fusei only eliminates a handful of collaborators, it is implied that this won't be the last conflict between the two sections. By having the main cast consist of mostly people operating within an oppressive system, you get a better viewpoint as to why the system is unjust. However, this ends up having an effect that neither Oshii nor Okiura could have ever predicted. A consequence of making your protagonist part of a fascist organization is actual fascists appropriating them as ideal heroes. The Kerberos unit, with their German-inspired super soldier aesthetic, are seen as aspirational figures, soldiers who will wash away their definitions of human filth from their imaginary perfect world. And of course fascists are obsessed with aesthetics over actual meaning because that is how they operate. They want it stripped away of any humanity because it makes the image more powerful, and that's actually something both Oshii and Okiura are aware of. What makes Jin-Roh an anti-fascist anime is how it observes fascist power structures stripping away humanity. This theme is shown to us through the anime's main subject, Fusei. In the changes he made to Oshii's script, Okiura really wanted to emphasize the relationship between man and the beast that lurks within. He did this by removing a lot of Oshii's flowery metaphors and instead focusing on montage to get this theme across. One of these montages is where during a date with Kei at a carnival, Fusei ends up having a vivid hallucination of him running with wolves in the same sewer where he witnessed the suicide of the girl in the beginning. He opens an iron rock gate, letting the wolves out to attack and kill Kei, and Fusei can only stand by and watch helplessly as they graphically devour her body. Wolves are a common motif in the Wolf Brigade. They are portrayed as vicious, hunting in packs, and without mercy. You are meant to draw comparison between them and soldiers in the special unit. In the introduction scene, they are portrayed as silent, ruthless killers, beasts that walk like men. Their protect gear removing any sense of humanity that lurks beneath the mask. And the conflict that works alongside the one between the special unit and public security is Fusei's internal conflict, one that rages between his humanity and his inner wolf. Even before he gets revealed to be a member of the Wolf Brigade, he is often compared to a beast. Fusei is encouraged to embrace the beast because it would make his job being part of a fascist apparatus much easier.
You can't let your emotions get the better of you and still do this kind of work. A wounded animal with no way to survive is not gonna make it.
And yet, he clings to his humanity in spite of himself. Every time he shows an ounce of mercy or hesitation out of his job, he is routinely reprimanded. This conflict between humanity and the beast is seen in another motif, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Throughout the movie, Kei narrates the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and it becomes increasingly obvious that it is meant to be both foreshadowing and an analog that Fusei, the wolf, is leading Little Red Riding Hood, Kei, into certain doom.
The little girl turned to her mother and said, "Mother, I'm feeling very sleepy."
Come over here and get some rest.
But it's not completely one-to-one. Kei isn't an innocent like Little Red Riding Hood because of her association to public security, and Fusei isn't completely a cold-hearted opportunistic beast like the wolf. As the film goes on, he begins to realize that his feelings for Kei are genuine, and not just him playing along with his role. The same applies to Kei as well. In his heart, he wishes he could go be with Kei for real and run away with her, abandon both of their commitments to their causes, and try to go off the grid together.
When I stand here like this, I start thinking that someday I'll be able to get out of this city and never come back. I'll go to where no one knows me, and I can be someone else.
Someone else?
But in the end, he's too attached to his mission and just in too deep with the special unit. Because Fusei is not just the wolf in the tale, he's also Little Red Riding Hood. And the wolf is fascism. This thought didn't hit me until a conversation between Kei and Fusei, where Kei asks why Fusei joined the special unit in the first place.
It's hard for me to explain, but it was like I finally found a place where I belong.
An important place?
I think so.
This short answer is the only thing we really know about Fusei's background. We don't know anything about where he was born, or his family, or what he did before he became part of the special unit, but the answer speaks volumes. One of the reasons why people get radicalized and fall into fascist groups is a sense of belonging. Fusei doesn't really appear to be that fanatical about the special unit's law and order mentality. He just wanted a place where he felt like he could be useful. So he allows himself to be inundated with this fascist mentality of becoming the beast in order to fit in with the group. And even though he may question why he must maintain this mentality at the expense of humanity, the fascist machine pumps his head full of lies to assuage his fears, a point that's alluded to in the Red Riding Hood story.
A little bird came flying and perched itself on the chimney stack. "That's your mother's blood you're drinking. You're drinking your mother's blood," it said. "Mother, there's a bird perched on the chimney stack, and it's saying that I'm drinking your blood."
Throw your cloak at the bird.
Fusei's not the only one with this problem. When she's fessing up to everything to Fusei, Kei admits that one of the reasons why she forsook her anarchist beliefs and went along with being a pawn for the state was because it was easier.
I agreed to everything they asked me to do. In a way, it almost seemed comforting. It became such a chore having to think all the time. I thought it best not to think about anything, or so I told myself.
Another reason why people choose fascism It's just easier to not have to think and just follow orders. Why endure the pain of being a man when the life of a loyal beast is so much easier? But deep down, Fusei still has the desire to retain his humanity. In a montage where he goes into town, he stares long and hard at an average man going about his daily life, secretly wanting to have his life. A normal, well-adjusted life. But as said before, he's too far gone into his unit. When he's revealed as a member of the Wolf Brigade, him putting on his armor is shot like a man transforming into a beast, ending with him putting on his mask and removing any sort of humanity.
We are not men disguised as mere dogs. We are wolves disguised as men.
Wolves, not men.
He doesn't speak in that scene from that point onward, signifying that any humanity left in him is gone. Except, that's not true. In the final scene, Fusei, unmasked, is given the final task of his mission: tie up the final loose end.
What's important is that they believe we have her. That is the insurance we have bought for ourselves. So in the end, whether she's alive or not doesn't matter.
Fusei tries to protest, but he is reminded of his status as a beast.
Do you want to leave the pack and live among the humans? Even if a wolf takes the guise of a man and lives among them, he can never be truly human.
So, he makes his choice.
Mother, what big ears you have. Mother, what big eyes you have. Mother, what big claws you have. Mother, what big teeth you have.
With that, Fusei is now fully a beast. He is now fully a cog in the fascist machine, an obedient wolf, a beast. And the final shot shows us that Fusei never even had a choice to begin with. The fascist machine was always going to make sure he stayed a beast. Jin-Roh the Wolf Brigade is such a raw, poignant look at a society under the hill of a benign fascism and how people buy into systems of oppression. In the grand scheme of things, it's just easier. You're not out there fighting for a cause you believe in against terrible odds. That's difficult. You're part in an in-group whose only duty is to follow orders. It's comforting, secure, something that you are willing to sacrifice your basic humanity to belong to. In retrospect, the reason why so many quit fighting on a grander scale after the Anpo protest was because it was just easier to give in and learn to live with an unjust system. You were no longer an outsider, and all you had to do was follow the laws of an unjust government and be rewarded for it. And just like Kei and Fusei and Jin-Roh, people might find themselves wanting to be a cog in a fascist machine, if only because it allows for a simpler existence. Even if you win the fight, there are still more fights ahead, so why not align yourself with the side of law and order, unjust as they are? It's better than having to continue to fight all the time, isn't it? But remember, Jin-Roh the Wolf Brigade tells us, just because being a beast for an oppressive system might allow for an easier existence, that will never translate to a happier existence.